Welcome to the 57th broadcast of the T Rose Show. That's your host, Keith. I've got John with me, and we are going to be talking about a lot of stuff today, so bear with us. I want to start out with we were talking about, I think last time, talking about how your person was offshore in the U.S. Virgin Islands and all that, making you enemies of the States of the Union, while the States of the Union were in the hands of the Grand Masters of the United States. And they're working on behalf of all the monarchs around the world. We're going to show and prove that today. I want you to see here is we're going to start out how they did it, or how they're doing it, and what we have to do is kind of change your perceptions a little bit. And this was from, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen him, Paul Hellyer. He's a former Canadian Minister of Defense, reveals the shocking truth about the current state of our world and who is truly in control. Okay, if you get a chance to see that, please do. It's a very enlightening video that's only 14 minutes long, and you can sit and listen to him explain what's going on. Now, one of the parts that he was explaining was how the foreign corporations or companies have more rights than the people. And there was a specific thing he was saying. He was saying a dispute settlement program. It's in these trade agreements. So people believe, okay, what we have to do is kind of change your perception about how things are going here, because you're claiming things, but when you're claiming them, they're not the literal complaint. Okay, it's not the real complaint. And I'm going to be starting courses on event identification soon. But what he was saying is that there's specific trade agreements for companies, foreign companies that do business, and he was talking about Canada. And same thing in the United States and everywhere else. That the rights were the foreign corporations had the right to sue if the government within that area did anything that hurt their profits or future earnings. And see, this is why we can't get the continental dollar in there, okay? Because you have foreign corporations that if they start using the continental dollar, it will show loss of profits. Then under these, what they call trade agreements, but not really, they're transfer of rights to foreign corporations, where essentially in the end, the foreign corporation has more rights than the people themselves. So how does this happen? Because you jump from one to another, and how this happens is that the representatives that people vote for are literally giving their rights away to the foreign corporations. That's how it's working. To where the representative that you're voting for doesn't have any rights. So essentially that would pass over to you. So they're not technically taking the rights of the people. They're technically taking the rights of the representatives of the people. And I believe Trump was talking about that. He said these agreements and these trade agreements are horrible, absolutely horrible. And I don't know if he's trying to change it or not. I'll get into that in just a little while because of this FISA memo and all this other stuff. We'll talk about that here in just a little while. But the point being is if the foreign corporations can sue the states for loss of profits and future earnings, those states are going to be closed because they don't have any rights. Essentially, they don't have any rights to accept anything, meaning all the representatives within the 528 corporations. That's why they were moved. Now, think about it this way. We've gone to 528 corporations being the Republicans and Democrats. I'll give you an example here. So if the 528 corporations were political parties, apparently the political power of those political parties was moved offshore to foreign corporations, and they were reduced to 528 corporations. If the judicial power was moved off to foreign corporations, then the courts would turn into private companies. I'm talking about the judicial power that was given to the representatives gave it away. Which, no matter what constitution, or whether it's your Articles of Confederation or Constitution, it doesn't matter what constitution we're talking about, it's still treason, whichever way you look at it. So, if you had the people's persons were given to the foreign corporations, yes, that will be trafficking in persons. You starting to see a pattern? I mean, what do you think, John? There's a pattern here, right?
Yes, there is.
Okay, now, how do they do that over a long period of time? That nobody really even notices what's happening. And by the time this, one generation goes to the next, you have no clue what happened in the previous one. So I came in here and people think that their person is a corporation. That's not what it is. Their all cap name is a corporation. It has been redefined as such, but it's not technically, it's just a person. Okay. What's happened is you got to turn that around. The corporations have become the people, have the same rights as the people. And then some will say, no, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. They have enough rights to where they can begin to take the rights of others. Okay? And this actually started, I've got this right here, it says turned into corporations into people. In 1809, it started then, right after the Bank of New York came in. Okay, and the Bank of the United States was a subsidiary of the Bank of New York, and that was done right after the Treaty of Paris in 1783, where the prince became the arch treasurer and blah blah. Okay, I'm not going to really go into a lot of these, but over a long period of time, in 1809, it started there. Then in 1844, they made another step. The Supreme Court shifted course, ruling that corporations were citizens of the states where they incorporated. Still, it is difficult for a corporation to sue or be sued in federal courts unless its shareholders lived in the same state. Well, we got to work on that, right? And a lot of these cases deal with the railroad and the 9 baron families. And those 9 baron families, I think they work under what was that agreement? You remember that agreement a long time ago? Has to do with the king, where they made it. I'll get back to it. All right. There was another one dealing with another railroad, 1853. Later upheld the notion that corporations were citizens, but only for the purpose of court jurisdiction. They did not have the same constitutional rights as actual people. The court also ruled that for litigation purposes, shareholders would be considered citizens of their company's home state. This has made it easier for corporations to sue or be sued in federal court by eliminating jurisdictional conflicts. Well, we needed to do that. Now you understand how a robot became a citizen of Saudi Arabia. They just keep slowly moving, slowly going. 1886, now that corporations were legally citizens, corporate attorneys worked to expand their rights. California officials levied a special tax on the South Pacific Railroad, and railroads sued, arguing that singling out the company violates its rights to equal protection under the 14th Amendment, which is intended to protect freed slaves. But no, it was there to protect corporations. The Civil War had nothing to do with slavery. See how they slipped that in? They take a hideous thing as slavery, and then they slip in what they really want. They do it in the background. I'm going to show you another example of that soon. In a strange twist, the court reporter, a former railroad man, wrote in the published notes on the case that the 14th Amendment did in fact apply to that company, even though this notion appeared nowhere in the High Court's actual ruling. 11 years later, the court declared that it was well settled that corporations are persons within the provisions of the 14th Amendment, citing Santa Clara. Then 1898, they did it again, voided Nebraska railroad tax, ruling that it was akin to the government taking corporations' property without due process. Now they start moving it in there. It says the decision was overturned in 1944. 1906 have blocked unlawful seizures of corporate property. The court went on to shield companies from other kinds of intrusions. We're going to show you the source of this. Writing for the majority, Justice Henry Billings Brown found that corporations like people are protected from unreasonable searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment. He says the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination did not apply. So they got one more step. 1931 did the same thing. High Court sided with the company that ruling that even foreign corporations are protected from unlawful government seizures under the Fifth Amendment, which ensures fair treatment by the legal system. 1977, after a criminal trial for two lending companies and their owner was dismissed due to jury deadlock, federal prosecutors appealed the decision. The Supreme Court ruled that the second trial violated the company's rights to be tried only once, expanding the double jeopardy rule to include both humans and corporations. All the way up to 2010. Federal Elections Commission blocked the conservative nonprofit Citizen United from airing a film about Hillary Clinton, based on a law barring companies from using their funds for electioneering communications within 30 days of the primary or 60 days of the general election. I remember that. The organization sued, arguing that because people's campaign donations are a protected form of speech, and corporations and people enjoy the same legal rights, the government can't limit a corporation's independent political donations. The Supreme Court agreed. The Citizens United ruling may be the most sweeping expansion of corporate personhood to date. All the way up to what? 2014. Corporations are legally people with the right to free speech, but they do have religious rights? Apparently they do. In 2012, Hobby Lobby, an Oklahoma-based craft store chain, sued the federal government, arguing that a provision of the Affordable Care Act requiring it to provide contraception coverage for employees violated shareholders' constitutional rights to freedom of religion. The Supreme Court sided with Hobby Lobby and found that corporations can assert the religious rights of their owners, and greatly expanding the power of shareholders while creating a world of confusion for corporate attorneys. And there it goes. They made them state citizens, folks. So think about it. If your vote goes to a representative in the House of Representatives, the House of Representatives gives those rights over to foreign corporations. Foreign corporations come in, they register to do business within the states, they become state citizens, and therefore their vote counts over yours. Because you're offshore and considered an enemy of the state. Your person is. See how this works?
Yep.
so that's what happened. Now, where is this all coming from? Okay, there's a little secret treaty that was involved. Remember, we were talking about the British American Union and the British, and we've proven that beyond a shadow of doubt that that's here. It's right on the back of your dollar bill. Go there. Both the British American Union insignia and or seal is on the left with the pyramid, all-seeing eye and all that. Okay, that represents foreign monarchs within the British Empire. Okay, so there's a connection there, and that wasn't there early on. Although the plannings of that seal went all the way back to 3 committees under the Articles of Confederation when they were trying to come up with a great seal for the country itself under the Articles of Confederation 1781. It was all starting back then. This was a very long plan, folks. So it's not like this happened overnight. They've been working on this for hundreds of years, generation after generation. Albert Pike comes in, and he starts his crap, starts the wars and all this other stuff. And I'll show you what happened there. Now, here is and this is a well-known treaty among certain circles. So this is, I'm not saying it, oh, this is a big surprise and this is huge. All we're doing is putting it together with what has happened before. Okay, so here we go. Let me close that window. The undersigned, it's a secret treaty of Verona. It's American Diplomatic Code, Volume 2, blah, 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 blah. The undersigned is specially authorized to make some additions to the Treaty of the Holy Alliance. After having exchanged their respective credentials, have agreed as follows. Okay, the high contracting parties, being convinced that the system of representative government is equally as incompatible with the monarchical principles as a maxim of the sovereignty of the people with the divine right, engage mutually in the most solemn manner to use all their efforts to put an end to the system of representative governments in whatever county it may exist in Europe, and to prevent it being introduced in those countries that are not where it is not yet known. Now you understand why there's a bunch of monarchs over in Africa and the people still don't have any rights? As it can be doubted that the liberty of the press is the most powerful means used by the pretended supporters of the rights of nations. See that? Pretended supporters. To the detriment of those of princes, the high contracting parties promise reciprocally to adopt all proper measures to suppress it, not only in their own states, but also in the rest of Europe. And this treaty came out in 1822. Okay, so in order to get rid of a representative and or a republic or whatever you wanted to do, what you have to do is you have to make sure it doesn't work. Make sure the voting system doesn't work. So that's why you're seeing all this. People are so frustrated with the voting system. This is why they put in the Electoral College. It was put in there on purpose to make sure it doesn't work. Because we've gone over that in one of the T-rows, I can't remember which one, where a Electoral College essentially says that you don't have a vote. Let's see how this was all put together way back when, and it was slowly, coming to fruition as it moves along. So be careful what you trust. Convinced that the principles of religion contribute most powerfully to keep the nations in the state of passive obedience, which they owe to their princes, the high contracting parties declare it to be their intention to sustain in their respective states those measures which clergy may adopt, with the aim of ameliorating their own interests, and intimately connected with the preservation of the authority of the princes and the contracting powers, joined to offer their thanks to the Pope for what he has already done for them, and solicit his constant cooperation in their views of submitting the nations. The situation of Spain and Portugal unite unhappily all the circumstances which this treaty has particular reference. The contracting parties, in confiding to France the care of putting an end to them, engaged to assist her in the matter which they may least compromise, and it says sick there, it should be compromised, then with their own people and the people of France by means of subsidy on the part of two empires of 20 million of francs, and blah, blah, blah. It goes on. Okay? So we all know that the kings around the world and kings and queens around the world today absolutely hate any form of republic or republican form of government. So just keep in mind right now that these Republicans and Democrats are not political parties. They gave their political power over to a foreign interest. And that was being done by the vehicle of foreign international bankers since 1933 when it went bankrupt and exists in name only. So the Constitution went over to the international bankers. They foreclosed on it. That's all that happened. So you have to see it from a different point of view. If your representative is diminished in his rights or her rights, then you have no rights. You have no representation. That's how it works. So I'm sure that everybody has heard about the FISA courts or the FISA report and all that stuff. And there's a little bit of a problem that a lot of people are not watching. Like we said before, the Civil War was not about freeing slaves. It was about giving rights to corporations. Because you're seeing the result of it today. This isn't working, that isn't working, blah, blah, blah. They just had a thing out on Twitter, I think. There was a guy that was over in Britain saying, you guys need to get rid of your Constitution because it doesn't work. You can't change anything, you can't do anything, blah, blah, blah. And what he's not saying is it was gotten rid of a long time ago. So what they're doing now is, I saw a story just a couple of days, or as actually yesterday, that was talking about 16 children had died due to the flu. So this got me thinking, they're all talking about FISA. So what are they slipping in? Because I kind of know how these guys think and how they slip things in. So I started taking a look around and did a little research. And so I said, where does all this? The influenza ward of the U.S. Army Camp Hospital in France, circa 1918. And the source was Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 and 1919. And John, when was World War One?
World War One.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1917, 1918.
Okay. So the deaths of 20 to 50 million people worldwide, including up to 675,000 in the U.S. This is not widely known. You can find it on the internet, but nobody really brings it up.
Mm-hmm.
While only about 1% of those infected with the virus died. That's 1% of all the people that had it. It became one of the deadliest viruses ever known to man. The 1918 flu has been described as capable of sickening and killing a person on the same day. The virus is an H1N1 type A influenza. Symptoms of infection were similar to, but more severe than typical seasonal flu. Now remember, they've given the flu a season now. You have an actual season. Oh, it's flu season. It's not like a season, It's become a season, all right? Viral pneumonia leading to acute respiratory distress was the primary cause of death. Recently, the virus was reconstituted from frozen tissue samples from a woman who died from the virus. Okay, so we know that 20 to 50 million people worldwide, including up to 675,000 in the US, died from the flu, the simple flu, which got me looking around. Okay, what have they done? Then I started looking at some keywords in a document, or another website, but I got the document itself. I just went ahead and took it off the internet. I did a print of it. Influenza is a major cause of sickness and death around the world and is one of the most important infectious diseases confronting the world today. Combined with pneumonia, Influenza is one of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. Even though most of its victims are elderly, pneumonia influenza is one of the top 10 leading infectious conditions listed as causing years of potential life lost by the Centers for Disease Control. These facts, plus the memory of great pandemic of 1918 and 1919, they brought that up, which killed about 550,000 people in the United States, which the other one said it was 675,000, and claimed over 20 million lives around the world. It said 20 to 50 million on the other website, have encouraged much research on this viral infection. The origin of virulent strains and the behavior of epidemics are still not well understood. However, on this viral infection, are still not well understood. However, and the unpredictability of emergence of new strains, influenza proteins present serious problems for public health-based control programs throughout the world. One major complication to controlling the disease is the fact that the flu during the early phase of the infection is often confused with the common cold. Influenza is a respiratory infection characterized by headaches, fevers, and short, dry coughs. Usually the disease lasts for up to a week, but infection is especially dangerous for a very young and elderly. Okay, now you can go into this and post-flu depression can last for several weeks or even months. Then I started looking here. Let me see if this one is it. Okay, this was interesting to me. Influenza was discovered not by a direct study of the disease in humans, but rather from studies in animal diseases. 1918, J.S. Cohen, a veterinarian, observed a disease in pigs, which is believed to be the same disease as now famous Spanish influenza pandemic of 1918. In 1928, N. McBride attempted to transmit influenza from a pig to pig by taking mucus from a respiratory tract of sick pigs and instilling it in the noses of healthy pigs. Now, why is that interesting? It's because the guys who run the stock market, it started out, they were pig farmers. There's a little bit of connection there. It gets better. However, this effort failed to transmit the disease because they inoculated only filtered material. Most types of bacterial filters used during that time were unable to allow for the flow of viral particles through them. Then look at the words, look at the name that comes up. During the same year, Robert Schopp, working at the Rockefeller Institute for Comparative Pathology in Princeton, New Jersey, repeated the same experiments inoculating unfiltered material. Instead, Schopp was not only able to reproduce the disease, but more importantly, he went on to demonstrate that pigs can also become ill when filtered fluid was used for inoculation. He was not only able to reproduce the disease. Now, why would the Rockefeller Institute pay for research to be able to reproduce the disease? The disease produced by the filtrate was mild and could be transferred repeatedly in pigs. This was the first reliable experimental evidence that influenza was caused by a virus and provided the basis for further research in the human form of disease. Now, I have heard, and I'm not saying that, this is true. I have heard that there is no such thing as a virus from people that have gone into colleges and talked to their research teams. And it's actually worms is what I've heard, okay? That AIDS virus is actually a worm. When you remove the worm, you remove the AIDS. But that's just my, just hearsay. Don't take that. Then it comes out and says people have suffered from influenza for thousands of years. How the hell do they know that? Viruses identical or closely related to the human form of the infection can be isolated from ducks, turkeys, swine, horses, and many other species of warm-blooded vertebrates. As well, it is hypothesized that humans probably acquired influenza when domestication of animals first began. The development of agriculture and the establishment of permanent settlements provided sufficient numbers of potential hosts to create an epidemic. Now, the term influenza was coined by an Italian in the mid 1700s to connote a disease resulting from miasma, bad air. The human disease is thought to have risen about 6,000 years ago. Okay, a human influenza virus was not isolated until when? 1933. That's when that Constitution went out the window. So we've got 1933, Rockefeller Institute. Wilson Smith, Christopher Andrews, and Patrick Ledreau first identified the virus that causes human influenza only because they found a suitable host for the propagation. Ledreau used ferrets in his studies and canine distemper virus and was able to propagate the flu virus at the same, in that same host. Why did they want to do that? As well, influenza virus was later shown to also infect adult mice and chicken embryos. Now, this is where where there's a lie, there's a truth. The 1518 pandemic was the first documented outbreak in which we can reasonably be sure it was caused by the influenza virus. Now, if this was the first documented outbreak, how is it that they know that people have suffered the influenza for thousands of years and the human disease is thought to have risen about 6,000 years ago? How would they know that if the 1518 pandemic was the first documented outbreak? See, every time you use these terms here, 1933, and terms like this, Rockefeller Institute, you're going to find this that the document does not make any sense because it's talking as if it has authority and knows something, but literally, how would they know? But people don't look at it that way because they'll come down and read this, the 1518 pandemic, and forget that they read this right here. If it's only been the 1518 pandemic was the first documented outbreak, how would you know that people have suffered from influenza for thousands of years? You wouldn't. There's no way you can prove it, in fact or otherwise. And why would the Rockefeller Institute be paying scientists to learn how to spread it? That's a lot of money.
Yes, it is. And they do that so they can, they've already got the vaccine and everything on the shelf. They just need an excuse to use it.
Right.
They create it to recover what they put into it and then multiply it beyond there. It's all for the money.
So while this whole FISA thing is going on and everybody's shocked about information that everybody's known since the inception of the agencies involved, like sorry guys at the FBI, everyone in the know, and especially if they've ever been around you, they all know that you're political and you're a political arm for political so-called political parties. Actually, you're being used as a political arm for foreign bankers. That's what you're being used for, and you have been used for that for quite a long time. So if don't get angry, just realize it's been the truth for years. Everyone knows that, okay? Especially on the streets, everybody knows that. They go, oh yeah, man, those guys are used. If you say something about the government, what do they say? The FBI is going to show up at your door. Think about it, folks. Come on. So this FISA memo, everybody's acting so shocked, but at the same time, you've got children and people dying from this flu. And they're not really saying much about it. There's a little blip of it here and a blip of there. They put it on the news here and there, but they're not really saying much about that. So the influenza, so-called virus in quotations, is nothing more than population control. And that's what's happening, why everybody's just so shocked that the Democratic Party would hire Russians to do this and do that and blah, 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 blah. And we're going to have our republic, and this is a Christian nation, and all these things that are being put out there. They bring up politics, they bring up religion, they bring up all these things to keep you busy, keep you hitting those tweets and all that stuff, while they do their population control, and all these other things are already in place. And slowly taking more and more rights of so-called representatives. So basically, the representatives can't do anything. And so Britain comes in and says, you need to get rid of your constitution because you guys can't change anything. And then other people come in and start saying, oh, no, that's the greatest document ever made, blah, 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 blah. Well, we've already proven that there's no provision for a president of the United States or executive power. So in its inception, there never was executive power within that document. Ever. There was never legal executive power. So right in its inception, they took one major right away. Because you'll notice the president of the United States never signs an executive order. It's the president of the United States of America that does not have, which are two separate entities, by the way, which does not have an oath and affirmation too. It's just presumed that he does. Okay? So all these things were put together slowly, methodically, and everything else so that they could bring in a monarch. That's the whole point of this. And that's why they never left a oligarchy form of government, which is oligarchy is only members of the family become a head of the country, even though they so-called elected. Trump's still a relative of George Washington. Same with Hillary Clinton and everybody else. They're all a part of that family. Bill Clinton is, the Bush family is, all of them are distant cousins. Why couldn't Bernie Sanders get in office? He wasn't a relative of George Washington. So if you want to know who's going to win, find the relative of George Washington. That's who's going to be put in office. You can predict it with 100% accuracy. It's going to happen. So we can all say that whether this or not, and we're going to talk about your what's going on over there in the company. If Trump is going to put all these changes in, or he is putting all these changes in, that's great. When the next guy gets in, they're going to reverse it and go right back to where they were. That's all that's going to happen. Because deep state's been there forever. Most of them are 20, 30 years. This guy's just a visitor. He's going to try to change things and do things. But what's going to happen is when his 8 years is up, because I think they're going to have election. They have another election in 2020. Same thing is going to happen. He's going to go back. Okay, so 2024. After 2024, it'll be back to where it was before. They'll go right back to draining. It's not draining the swamp. It's draining the political, executive, all the power away from all those representatives, so that people get so frustrated it doesn't work, and they have a revolution and destroy it themselves. That's what they're trying to get you to do. If you destroy it, then you will happily accept, well, we need to go back to a monarch rule and blah, blah, blah. And that'll change the country, and they got it done. Everybody's back to subject again. Then you'll find out that your condition won't change at all, because you've been subjects for a long time. When they trafficked your person offshore, you were already subjects of the British Union. You've already been a subject to a monarch your whole life. You just don't see his face. And he doesn't say, you're my subject. He does it through his companies and corporations. So, anything else you want to cover, John?
No, sir, not at this time.
Okie
Let you
dokie.
think, let you think something else.
No, I think I'm good. I think if people can listen to this, spread it around. We do appreciate the likes, and we do appreciate all of the subscribers. We're getting quite a few there. We're getting a bunch every day. That's a great thing. So we do appreciate it. We know word's getting out, and the government of the United States of America is still in operation and still accepts resident declarations and all that. Next week, we will probably be telling you the easiest, fastest, and quickest way to take back your states and take back the offices. And we're going to show you how to do that legally and through legal means by which way you can do that. And it is a surefire way of being able to take back your offices that you want done, that you want taken back. So we'll talk about that next week. And thanks for listening to the T Row Show. See you next week.